On the soft bed. But look at her.
She's so cute.
And that's soft enough we can sit up on the bed. You know?
Yeah.
But I'm taking it with her to Matt's place as well.
Yeah, she'll feel home then.
Yeah, there's snuggle beds for cats. Look, put a Sigma face in there.
So the toys I've got the kids.
Yeah.
Somewhere over the rainbow, where there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. And the dreams that you dare to dream, they really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me. Where
Hey, Wyo, good to see ya.
troubles melt like lemon drops.
Yeah, everything's going great. They keep mucking around my channels. I keep getting copyright strikes, or community standard strikes. So I'm on my last channel now. Good to see you, Wyo. Hey, Diane.
Away above the chimney tops, that's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true.
Hi, Anne. Good to see ya.
Someday I wish upon a star, and I wake up where the clouds are far behind.
Yeah, Wyo, you're so right. Yeah, you're right. They pick on the Christians. I'm doing something right. You're very correct.
Where troubles melt like lemon drops, away above the chimney tops, that's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds
Hey Jay, good to see you, mate.
over the rainbow. Why, little, why can't I? If birds fly over the rainbow, why? Then, oh, why can't
It's time to start pack your bags. Flight Centre's Saturday ticket sale is on now. Go for the beaches, stay for the cocktails, and let us unravel everything in between. But hurry, deals this hot only come round once in a Blue Lagoon. Book now. Flight Centre. I believe it.
Okay, guys, I don't know this channel. Yeah, it's religious history documentaries. So if I'm copywriting, they'll give me a heads up. But I don't know this channel. I don't know what they're going to say. But the headline is How Close Are We to the End of Days? The Coming Convergence. So hopefully it'll be interesting.
Our achievements surpass imagination. Our creations marveled. But our hearts are not pure. So, in the pursuit of greatness, we built our empires upon death and suffering. But the world we shaped could never last. In the end, we brought wrath upon ourselves to cleanse the corruption. And I was there. And the skies opened and fire rained down from the heavens. I witnessed a new leader rise from the ashes, promising peace. But only death came. Now, as the world wages war, I hide, as the innocent are slaughtered. But there were those that knew these days were coming, speaking of prophecies and signs.
We will be moving toward a one-world government.
Maybe that's why I'm still here, to warn you how the world really ends. This may be a lot to take in, but for me, the world has already ended. Well, the world you know anyway. I remember the whispers about new world orders and the end of days. Of course, who could believe in such nonsense? Or so I thought. The world wanted change. It wanted a new age of peace. Who knew that this pursuit would usher in the very things we feared the most? Now, everything I loved is gone, and I am left with one purpose: to deliver a message, to testify to the truth. I know just telling you isn't enough.
it never was. Truth. Who was it that once asked, "What is truth?" as it stood before him? Nothing ever changes. So I'll tell you what your future holds, and I'll do my best to prove it is the truth. Not long ago, where you are now, there was a message, a warning that still haunts me to this day. More should have listened. This is how it began. How will the world end? This very debate has been saturated by endless views and opinions,
Consumed within a sea of noise. For some, the topic is nonsensical. For others, the answer is clear, as millions look to ancient biblical prophecy as the answer to what lies in wait for humankind's fate. Regardless of what you believe, the very debate has seen a resurgence due to unprecedented global conflicts and instability. With this, however, comes new claims that the long-awaited convergence of prophesied events, destined to trigger the end of our age, is not only entirely real, but have finally begun. Most people agree the world as we know it will come to an end one day, just not in their lifetime. And even if the end was near, it could never be proven, right? So why is it that millions of people all over the world still insist that the end is upon us? Are they naive or misled by skewed religious views? Or is there a deeper understanding, whispers of truth that have been buried in this generation that are so profound it would change the way we understand everything? But even if such evidence existed, its warnings will likely fall on deaf ears. Often, when one hears about biblical prophecy or the end of days, as it is found within ancient scriptures, such as the Book of Revelation or the Dead Sea Scrolls, many already have deeply ingrained preconceived notions. After all, haven't we heard all this before? Anything new would no doubt just be another claim regarding some astrological event or rare date as a harbinger for the end. And it's not difficult to see why so many have this perception, as endless streams of information and media are absorbed into a desensitized and instant gratification society. News organizations and corporations compete to capture greater market share through sensationalized headlines and claims that result in complex topics being broken down into 8-second explanations, replacing genuine prophetic discussions into viral-worthy predictive claims that often look like this.
Nations begin a new arms race in preparation for global nuclear war.
Prophecy experts point to a celestial sign as the harbinger for the end.
Beginning of the end. Survival bunkers are now big business as preppers say yes.
Experts say that a solar flare will bring down the grid.
Ending life as we know.
Report that a massive radiation
Millions prepare for Y2K. This computer bug will collapse.
breaking news from Channel
Eclipse could trigger
The beginning of the
threat of a
end.
global pandemic is at an all-time high.
collapse society.
Astrophysicists discover planet X. Some say it
Millions look to the sky.
Dire implications.
The Mayan calendar predicts the world will end in 2012.
will. Up next, how to make apocalypse puppy cookies.
The Mayan prophecies, obviously, 2012, the world didn't end. So you look at these things and they're so vague and so general, a lot like astrology charts.
And there's the problem. The endless stream of claims that have been ingrained into the minds of the public as billions watch predicted events and dates come and go, yet life marches on as usual. And then there are claims from infamous individuals such as Nostradamus, a French apothecary that lived during the 15th century, that many today attribute credit for predicting the rise of Hitler. Surely he lends some form of credibility to the idea of genuine prophecy. At the very least, the same level of credibility that popularized much of biblical prophecy, right? Actually, most experts disagree.
Let's say Nostradamus, for example. He speaks in very broad generalities of things that are going to happen. I could say the same thing. In the future, some man's going to rise up and he's going to have all this incredible power, and he'll do this and that. And if I get 50% close, which odds are probably pretty good, you say, oh, he prophesied that. But the Bible doesn't do that. The Bible gives you specifics about what's going to happen.
There's a lot of prophecies.
That was Doug Hamp. I play a bit of Doug Hamp, guys. You know that.
That are out there. There's the Mayan prophecy. There's Nostradamus, and there's prophecies about dead popes. There's all types of prophecies that are out there. What makes biblical prophecies so different is their accuracy. And we find them in the Bible. What's interesting about this and the teaching of Bible prophecy is you're able to find out some things. Many of the prophecies have already come to be. And when we look at the predictions or the so-called prophecies of these other religions, sure, you can have a prediction here, a prediction there, 1 out of 100, 2 out of 100, maybe 3 out of 100.
And that's the amazing thing about biblical prophecy, is that biblical prophecy is something that you can actually study scientifically. It's actually called eschatology, where what the Bible has claimed to be prophetic, in fact, 27% of the Bible is prophetic, that the claims that it makes, do they come to pass? Is it true what the Bible has to say?
So, is it? What is the difference between the predictions that have come and gone without fulfillment versus what has been foretold in the ancient biblical scriptures? Non-biblical predictions, which is what most are familiar with, are often made by individuals with heightened public attention due to their sensational and simplified approach to claims regarding a specific approaching date or signs in the cosmos. In addition to the previous examples, there were also those that believed the world would end during the turn of the 19th century, and yet again, just a few years later, in the year 1910, with the appearance of Halley's Comet, that was publicized as a divine signal for the end of the world. But does any of this have anything to do with biblical prophecy? Actually, no. Unlike the countless vague predictions made throughout recent centuries, biblical prophecy contains an unprecedented and complex tapestry of interwoven chronological events and details that present the complete timeline of humankind from the beginning to the end. In fact, the complete ancient scriptures contain over 2,500 prophetic details, which were recorded over a millennium by 40 separate authors. In fact, the records are so complete, it's the longest running contiguous record of human history in existence, and as a result, continues to be studied by universities and independent researchers all over the world. Unlike any other record, the scriptures precede and survived through the rise and fall of countless civilizations, including the ancient Babylonians, Egyptian, and Roman empires. As astounding as the preservation of the records throughout the ages may have been, it also continues to be proven shockingly accurate, as archaeologists continue to uncover newly discovered ancient ruins throughout the Middle East, along with hundreds of thousands of artifacts that directly support biblical history and fulfilled prophetic events.
With all the prophecies that came true regarding the past, we can go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and we can see the development of the nation of Israel over the centuries. You have prophecies regarding Egypt. You have predictions regarding these various things that happened in the book of Daniel. You have the prophecies regarding the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire that came to be. And man, they were fulfilled with 100% accuracy. All of them were.
Just one example of how accurately chilling the events within the prophetic timeline are, we can look to a warning about how just one city in particular, the city of Tyre, would be utterly destroyed by Alexander the Great, recorded 200 years before it was fulfilled in the greatest of detail.
The whole city would be so destroyed that it would be down to the very dust, and then he would throw all the rocks into the sea. Now, if you know the history of Tyre a little bit, you know that King Nebuchadnezzar came and he began to siege the city. But what happened is, in the meantime, while King Nebuchadnezzar was outside attacking the city, the people of Tyre decided that the only option they had was to move their whole city to a little island off the coast, until finally, when they just gave up the city, Nebuchadnezzar got through and everything was gone. Everything of value was gone. Now, if you are a soldier of the ancient world, one of the reasons you're fighting, it's not for the fatherland or something. You want to get those gold plates and all the wonderful things that are in that city. That is your payoff. So Nebuchadnezzar left that feeling very frustrated. But what happened is, years later, Alexander the Great came and he attacked Tyre, and of course they would not capitulate, and so he took the stones that had been left in ruins from the city on the mainland. He took all those and he threw them into the sea to build a causeway so that Alexander the Great could then go and come to the sea.
Not only did every detail come to pass as it was foretold, but secular history confirms the entirety of this event as the prophecy was fulfilled in July of 332 BC.
You know, this is something that's very specific, talking about what's going to happen to a particular city in a particular way. It's not just this broad generality of what, might happen, where kind of anybody can make up these broad prophecies.
The details surrounding how the destruction of Tyre came to pass is not the exception throughout the ancient prophetic timeline, but rather the rule. But even this is only the tip of the iceberg. The complete prophetic timeline is so detailed and complex in structure that the passing of many events rely on previous prophecies coming to pass first. Like a row of dominoes, if just one event in the timeline doesn't come to pass, the entire chronological and future sequence of events and fulfillments would completely fall apart. In this aspect, there is no other record like this in existence anywhere in the world. But to understand what this all has to do with us today and the end of the world, we first have to follow the timeline through one of the most researched and astounding sequences of prophesied events that history indisputably confirms came to pass, which still sends shockwaves throughout global culture and political landscapes today. A sequence that began around 2,000 years ago, when Jesus of Nazareth walked the earth. Based on historical records, Jesus' birth and life is believed by various researchers to have fulfilled upwards of over 300 prophetic events and descriptions from the Old Testament records, some of which were recorded hundreds to thousands of years before Jesus first walked in Jerusalem. Even the details surrounding how he would be executed were foretold in the prophetic timeline, around 400 years before crucifixions were even invented. It was during Jesus' time in Jerusalem that his disciples came to him and asked about the end of the age. They knew that if he was who he truly claimed to be, the prophesied Messiah, then he could tell them exactly what was going to happen to the empires of the earth, including Israel itself. And according to the ancient records, Jesus answered them in shocking detail.
He has told us things that are going to take place at the end of days, at the end of this age. In fact, the disciples, when they asked Jesus about what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age, and he goes through and he starts to tell them all of these different things to look for.
And what Jesus foretold was not what they wanted to hear.
When Jesus was in Jerusalem, Jesus did not talk to the people about the empire growing, the nation ruling the world. In fact, one of the most frightening things that Jesus said to the Jews was not only that the destruction of the temple would happen, but that the Israeli nation would cease to exist. It would be scattered and destroyed.
Not only did Jesus provide details regarding the end of the world, speaking of concepts and global change taking place in the far future, but he also warned of events that would happen much sooner to the nation of Israel itself. He foretold of the complete destruction of Israel and the dispersal of the Jewish people to the four corners of the earth, a terrifying warning that most believed would surely never come to pass. But almost 40 years after Jesus' crucifixion, in 70 AD, the prophecy was fulfilled exactly as he said it would be. The nation of Israel fell by an invading Roman army, led by the future Emperor Titus. The Jewish temple in Jerusalem, a massive structure over 40 acres in size, was completely destroyed so that no two stones laid upon another, just as Jesus foretold, and more than 1 million Jews were slaughtered during the siege of the city. The small surviving remnant of the Jewish people were dispersed to the four corners of the earth. The nation of Israel was so decimated by military force that for all practical purpose, the Jewish bloodline was considered virtually dead. But following the structural rules of the prophetic timeline, there was much more to this prophecy. Decades before the destruction of Israel came to pass, it was also foretold that long after Israel would fall in the future, through utter destruction and displacement, the people would later be regathered into the original land, and the nation would be reborn. In fact, Jesus himself, who often spoke in parables, gave such an example through the imagery of a dead fig tree coming back to life at the beginning of the end of days.
Well, there's a prophecy that Jesus gave. He says, learn the parable of the fig tree.
And he talks about how this fig tree, when you see it begin to blossom, that will be the
Good night, YA. God bless this day. It's good to see ya.
generation that sees his return. Very, very significant statement. Most Bible scholars believe that imagery in the parable of the fig tree is symbolic of Israel. So Jesus himself is saying, when you see that fig tree budded, coming back to life, know that my return is near.
So understanding that the fig tree that Jesus was talking about is in fact Israel. And they say when it comes back, then it will be the last days. It will be the days of Antichrist.
Prophecy foretells that the end of days would begin with the rebirth of Israel. But of course, this event could never happen if the nation and people were not decimated in the first place, presenting more compounding evidence as to the complexity of the ancient prophecies. But if this sequence of events wasn't miraculous enough on its own, Additional prophetic details regarding how the rebirth would be fulfilled is something that would leave anyone speechless.
In Ezekiel 37, you have the Valley of the Dry Bones, this picture of all these bones of the Jewish people that have been scattered and separated, coming back together as a nation. We also have the prophecy in Isaiah that talks about how Isaiah is startled to be told that somehow will a nation be born in a single day, asking how does that happen? How do nations just be born in a single day?
As if the prospect that a decimated nation with a remnant scattered to the four corners of the earth could be reborn wasn't hard enough to believe, prophecies recorded over 2,000 years ago clearly foretold that this rebirth would occur in a single day. A seemingly optimistic view, to say the least, but surely one that could never come to pass, as something of this nature has never happened in the history of the world.
There has been no country in the history of the world that has ever been completely destroyed, scattered among all the other populations of the planet, and then reborn in their original homeland, with their original language, with their original heritage intact.
But after 1,800 years,
as a new day dawns, it's the end for bad breath germs.
the impossible happened. On May 14, 1948, after the Holocaust and the end of World War II, the nation of Israel was reborn, and the Jewish people once again had a land to call home. The action was ordered by the United Nations and was the first and only time the UN had created a new state by way of a General Assembly vote.
We want to see the time come when we can do the things in peace that we have been able to do in war. If we can put this...
So what we find is in 1948, May 14th, Israel becomes a nation again. This is unheard of. Never has a nation been out of its land for about 1,800 years and then comes back as a people group. It just doesn't happen. They become assimilated and they become part of the rest of the world.
But as miraculous as this event was, this is far from the happy conclusion one might expect, and is merely a milestone within the prophetic timeline that continues on through the end of days, foretold as a sign for things to come.
I believe the greatest sign of our time is the rebirth of the Jewish nation. The last time that there was such a thing as Israel, Jesus Christ himself was walking on the earth. And there are many prophecies that talk about in the latter years and in the latter days, God would regather his people from the four corners of the world.
The prophecies warn that when Israel is reborn, all of the remaining events within the scriptural timeline will come to pass during what is described as the last generation.
There's a lot of Bible prophecy teachers that believe the generation that saw the rebirth of Israel, based on the illustration of the fig tree, they believe that those who see the rebirth of the nation of Israel in 1948, then it's that generation of people who will see the second coming of Christ.
What's interesting about Psalm 102, when the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall return in his glory. Well, Zion is a spiritual name for Jerusalem. Jerusalem is being rebuilt right now. And the Lord says he's going to appear in his glory as Jerusalem is being reestablished and rebuilt. And he says this will be written for the generation to come. And that Hebrew word that is used and translated into English, to come, means the last generation, means the end or the terminal generation.
So according to the prophetic timeline, our final hours have already begun, triggered by the rebirth of a nation that is quickly becoming a focal point for global conflict.
So I say this generation will by no means pass away until all these things are fulfilled. And that is why we look to Israel as a major sign that we're in the last days.
So if, for example, if the definition of the last generation is a person born on May 14th, 1948, all of these remaining prophecies will be fulfilled before the end of that person's lifetime.
So, how long is a generation? This is one of the more debated topics in eschatology amongst researchers, which see ancient prophecy define a generation in the last days as being around 80 years, and in some examples as long as 120 years. Surprisingly, though the scriptures were written thousands of years ago, these time frames for a generation appear to coincide with exactly what modern medical science defines as one's average to maximum lifespan today, something that was not always the case. For example, only a few hundred years ago, during the medieval age, the average lifespan was only around 35 years.
What we do see developing is Israel's definitely a nation again. And that is really the key. I don't believe it's necessary to go to a position of, well, it's 80 years or 20 years or 40 years from 1948 or 100 years. It's just understanding that we are in the last days because Israel is a nation again. God is gathering the Jews back from the north, the south, the east, and the west.
So if we are indeed living in the last generation, as prophecy claims, then it stands to reason that we are far closer to the end of the world, as most people would want to believe.
There are about 500 future prophecies that are coming together. We are looking for these prophecies to be fulfilled essentially in our lifetime because we are in the last generation. In fact, we're nearing the end of that last generation. So we should start to see the convergence of these prophecies right now happening around the world in front of us.
And it wasn't until Israel became a nation in 1948 that many of these things could even take place. If you were to line up a row of dominoes, Israel is...
Just subscribing to the channel, guys.
That first piece. It's that first trigger that allows all the other prophecies of Scripture to take place.
Of the estimated 2,500 prophecies contained within the ancient biblical timeline, only 500 of them remain to be fulfilled. So what exactly do they foretell? These final prophecies provide a sequence of specific events foretelling of an unprecedented union of world relations and economic systems that will give rise to a new authority with influence over all global affairs. But as soon as the world achieves this new union and declares peace and safety, humankind will be on the brink of chaos and unprecedented natural events that will usher in a period of death and destruction that is foretold to end 2/3 of the global population. So if we are truly approaching the end of the age, then there should be evidence that the remaining prophesied events are converging to fulfillment right before our very eyes, foreshadowing a perfect storm of global change, unlike any other time in history.
Power up this tax time at Bunnings Trade. Trade in your old 18-volt power tool battery and get $50 off a top brand twin.
So has this convergence already begun? Does the foundation for unprecedented global change truly already exist? The remaining prophecies within the ancient timeline foretell of multiple layers of events that converge to trigger what is often referred to as the tribulation period, or the end of days. The first layer of converging global change is the beginning of wars and rumors of wars that result in peace being removed from the earth.
Jesus is giving signs that would indicate that his coming is near, his second coming. One of those is, and you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, But that is not yet the end. He went on to say, there shall be nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. But that particular expression, nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, is actually a Hebrew idiom, and it means world war. Jesus said world wars will be the sign of the beginning of the end.
And there's going to be some very large wars that are going to be happening on a mass scale.
Wow, World War will be the prophecy in the end. And World War I and II, and now we're going into World War III. Wow.
We recognize biblically this is the way that things are going.
We're not talking about isolated skirmishes. We're talking about wars on a global level, many, many wars scattered throughout the world so that the whole world is essentially at war, and rumors of many other wars that will be starting. We're starting to see more wars now and more rumors of wars starting around the world than any other time.
In fact, many of the conflicts we see today are associated with the spread of global terrorism and the threat of attack that could potentially take place in any nation at any time. Unlike regional wars, this new growing threat now affects nearly every person on Earth, and in many aspects directly relates to the unprecedented concept of humankind living in a state where peace is dissipating from our societies and being replaced by fear.
The more these radical terrorists spread around the world, the more people are becoming afraid. I mean, TSA has security, massive security at all the airports. They're afraid that bombs are going to go off in elementary schools, in churches, in buses. And so the more this happens, the more peace is being removed.
Things are getting worse, and we are beginning to see a global outcry for the governments of the world to work together in order to provide peace and safety, foreshadowing the need for dramatic change. But often, change comes through necessity, and according to the sequence of remaining prophecies, that necessity is coming very soon.
Is the world really coming to an end? That's what you want to know, right? Or maybe you're just killing time. I hope not. That's the last thing you have. Everything you've seen so far is your past. Things you should already know. And those warnings about wars and rumors of wars. It's all true. Things changed quickly in those final years. There were so many conflicts in those days that people stopped keeping track. Peace was something that now existed only in our memories, replaced by illusions of progress. We were consumed by a blindness. Other generations might have noticed, but not us. Not the terminal generation. Conflict and change is what we were all born into. Isn't this normal? Isn't this just the way life is supposed to be? Even as the world began to spiral out of control, how could we have known that this was only the beginning of sorrows.
I'm Tom Colicchio, and this is my Meetup with Meter. Again, I love the meter because it syncs up to your smartphone. You can program a cook.
Everything from this point on is your future.
What the hell? Usually crap finishes.
It's as if the event was recorded by an eyewitness, shockingly naming countries, describing political coalitions and reasons why the conflict will begin in the first place, and chillingly, the fact that this conflict will last only one day. The additional details surrounding this future event is presented in such detail that it terrifies many theologians, not because of the horrific events surrounding this particular conflict, but rather because many believe the drums of war for the start of this conflict can already be heard. The details, written over 2,000 years ago, name Iran, Syria, Libya, and surprisingly Russia as coming together in the last days to attack Israel. Only a few decades ago, the scenarios surrounding this war stumped theologians, as the idea of nations such as Russia allying with Iran to attack Israel appeared politically improbable, if not impossible. But in this last generation, things have changed.
Russia, of course, has a very strong Islamic presence in its southern republics. And there are some who believe that it may just involve the southern republics of Russia. Other Bible scholars believe it's Russia itself that will join Iran and some other countries involved in attacking Israel, one of those being Libya. What's interesting over the last couple of years since the death of Muammar Gaddafi is Libya has also gone more Islamic, and that you could see how an Islamic nation like that would be involved in an attack on Israel.
Actually, in recent decades, Russia has increasingly embraced an anti-Western stand on many political and economic policies, and continues to build new relations with the very nations listed in the scriptures, including Iran. In fact, Russia has even recently used Iranian military bases to launch airstrikes in the Middle East. And the two nations are working together to build new Iranian nuclear power plants and centrifuges. Russia is also known to have provided stockpiles of missiles and weapons to their numerous Islamic and anti-Israeli allies. This is definitely an alarming sequence of political events that many today could never have predicted, and yet thousands of years ago, this was foretold to happen even before such common interests found amongst these allies, such as worldviews formed by Islam and the United Front to stand against the newly formed Israel even existed. Because of this, we can now easily see why nations such as Iran, Syria, and Libya would be involved in this war. But why Russia? Though they do have a growing Islamic presence within the nation, it's clearly not as influential as we see within other Islamic states. Surprisingly, though, the scriptures actually tell us why.
Nations are set up exactly as God said. The reason for the war is this leader in Russia who recognizes Israel has something, it's called plunder. Israel has something that the leader of Russia wants. And I believe, and I know many Bible prophecy teachers have believed this for a number of years, that's going to be related to energy.
There seems to be a lot of truth in this. Recently, Israel discovered massive pockets of natural gas, a finding that could potentially shift economic power from Russia and several Islamic states in the region to Israel.
Currently, we
Like that.
recognize that Russia supplies almost all of the gas for Europe. So the leader of Russia threatened, you know what, I'm going to shut off your gas supply this winter if you don't comply with me. But Israel now has discovered a massive gas supply, one of the largest the world has ever come across. And it appears that there are negotiations right now. Israel is in negotiations to possibly supply Europe through Cyprus. If that were to happen, if Israel were to start supplying Europe with gas, I could only imagine what the leader of Russia would do.
Far-fetched? Not really. There have actually been times that Russia has indeed threatened to reduce or turn off gas supplies to various countries for political leverage. And history teaches that wars are often waged over natural resources, including when the United States invaded Iraq in the 1990s to gain greater control over oil production. In fact, not only could Israel's growing energy sector directly begin to affect the Russian economy, many Middle East nations, especially Iran, would see this as a direct threat to national security. So it stands to reason that a preemptive attack that involves Russian support in some form can easily come to fruition. But with all of the wars and rumors of wars occurring in these last days, why does the prophetic timeline emphasize this conflict in particular? What makes this war such a crucial piece to the end of days scenario?
Is your family a D90 SUV family? No, no, no.
And the way it's described in Scripture as happening in a single day, where this conflict is resolved in a single day. And the way Ezekiel 38 describes this battle with fire and brimstone destroying those who come against Israel, including those in the coastlands. And when this fire comes, you have the people who are coming against Israel instantly dropping their weapons. And this idea that it's instant death. This seems to be speaking very much of a nuclear type of vaporization, where people are being impacted by a nuclear blast. And so we very well may have the first instance of nuclear weapons being used in Scripture.
Nuclear war, an event that has never occurred between the Middle Eastern nations at any time in history. This conclusion, by many eschatologists, isn't as sensational as you may believe, especially when considering what the Scriptures describe as taking place after this war comes to an end.
What's interesting is Ezekiel 38 is one of the few places in the Bible that describes the post-battle scenario, where they are told to leave the bodies for 7 months. No one is to touch the bodies for 7 months, and then the professionals are to come and gather the bodies.
That there may be some type of nuclear contamination that's involved because of the types of the equipment and the fact that the people who come in to do the cleanup, they can't do the cleanup right away.
That sounds very much like a WND manual for how you should treat a biological nuclear weapon conflict.
And that's not all. The place where at least one blast is foretold to occur, where bodies are left for 7 months after the population is wiped out by instant death, is also named in the ancient scriptures. A place that is said will never be inhabited again. A city that prophecy states will become a heap of ruins. Damascus, Syria.
We're looking at a time where today, Damascus is a city of well over 1 million people. Yet the Bible tells us in Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1, that there will come a time in the last days where it says something will happen in Damascus that it will render Damascus uninhabitable forever.
It'll change the geopolitical situation forever.
It is not difficult to imagine the inevitable global outcry after such an event occurs, breaking the proverbial straw to implement new policy changes that will prevent such an act from ever happening again. But even this is only the beginning of the end. While telltale signs for expanding wars and rumors of wars shake nations around the world, there is yet another layer of prophecy that is simultaneously converging before our eyes, one that already directly affects you. The global financial system. The stability of our systems is already a grave concern for most governments around the world, and often supersedes the fears of any modern-day war. After all, money is the one thing that truly controls every aspect of our world, including the ability to wage war and care for growing populations. So if wars and rumors of war wasn't dire enough, what the scriptures say regarding the world's economies during the last days is even worse. In various ancient records that make up the prophetic timeline, including those found within the Book of Revelation and the Dead Sea Scrolls, it warns that when peace is removed from the earth, the last generation would witness global economic collapse.
Prophetically, the scriptures do talk about the economic situation of the planet. What it essentially describes is a very, very dire situation where people can't even make enough money to buy a loaf of bread at the end of the day, where the economies all over the planet have collapsed.
Everything revolves around the world's financial systems. A collapse in these systems would result in the loss of the quality of life so many have become accustomed to. When it comes down to it, most would agree economic instability is a threat that far more people today fear than even the threat of radical terrorism.
We're seeing a gathering of nations where economics is failing them. Nations are in debt. Currencies are failing.
So this is a situation that we now start to see happening around the planet. The economies around the world are starting to falter. They're being artificially bolstered by nations printing tons and tons of money, not based on anything that's substantial like gold, just based on the fact that we have promissory notes.
The frightening truth is that the foundation and the financial structures of the world have been cracking for quite some time, and many believe that the indications for a global economic collapse have already begun. These are not isolated events, but foreshadow a future that many believe can no longer be avoided. But not only would the last generation experience global economic instability, decline, and eventual collapse, but that there would specifically come a day where the world economic systems would completely come crumbling down in a single day.
Support your well-being with the power of pure essential oils from Oil Garden. Just $23.99 at Chemist Warehouse.
In all of human history, there has never been a situation where there was even remotely possible to have a worldwide global collapse. Never mind that this collapse could happen globally on a single day. But today, with the advent of technology, through numbers, through computers, through transferring of funds, there's nothing tangible like it existed for thousands of years. This is the only time in the entire history of the world where we have had a single worldwide economy.
In fact, even a few generations ago, this concept was considered ridiculous. For example, after World War II, when the United States was booming economically, Europe was still in a depression. Various countries and regions often went through periods of economic prosperity and decline that were mostly unrelated to the financial state of others. But today, everything has changed. We have now created the exact global financial system that the prophetic records foretold would exist in the last days. The creation of a single global economic system. And examples of just how the global economy will collapse can be seen right now.
Well, you see a very minor example in our stock market and the NASDAQ and the Hong Kong exchanges, so that when they have a very bad day and say they drop, they plummet in one day, you see the ripple effect happening around the world and all the other markets. But imagine that's not just a small plunge of a few percent, but literally an absolute collapse. That ripple effect will happen all over the planet immediately in all the countries. And so that's the type of effect we're talking about. And that could not happen at any other time in human history.
We see this in real-world applications every so often. A market crashes, and within 24 hours, that crash ripples across the world as each market opens, until virtually all of the world's markets have plunged. And thanks to the modern-day advent of instant global communication, this results in immediate global panic. The irony is that economically, it's the pursuit of global unity through technology that in the end will be our very downfall.
So the world economy is very, very fragile, and it wouldn't take too much to upset that.
It wouldn't take much for the stock market to collapse and the entire economy we know and the way it works to change.
There are a number of people who want to be optimistic, who think that, you know, we can restructure economy, we can restructure job salaries, we can erase some of the debt. We are so far beyond that, it is not even conceivable that the debt can be repaid. Because of the amount of debt currently that exists worldwide, including the United States, and the revenues of all the people of those countries, economic collapse on a worldwide basis is absolutely inevitable. It really is inevitable. There's no possibility of it not happening.
Wait, I have to tell you, I used to be just like the world. I was the world, seeking the greatest pleasures and luxuries it had to offer, immersed in the pursuit of endless celebration. But really, we were distracting ourselves from the truth. That for all the comforts the world has to offer, they last for only a moment. So we consume a distraction for each moment of our lives, hoping that somehow it can last forever. In truth, we despise the endless toil to fill our days, knowing that we can't stop the inevitable. So, what value is there in something that doesn't last? Even so, I did what we all do. I covered up my fear with distraction. Oh yeah, the world markets did collapse, just as he said. And all of the dreams of success and luxuries we pursued began to pass away, replaced by bitterness. But instead of seeing how it was our own hand that brought this upon ourselves, we blamed God for our suffering. But how can the world blame someone that they don't believe is there? That's probably why things got worse.
And though the writing is on the wall for approaching global change, much of which appears to be caused by our own hand. There is yet another layer in the prophetic timeline that we are told will prove the last days are truly upon us. The convert.
Where you bank can change the world.
The convergence of natural catastrophic events, unlike anything we've ever witnessed before.
Regarding those specifics, for example, the Bible says there'll be signs in the heavens. In fact, in the context, the Bible says there'll be signs in the heavens, and there will be times upon the earth, the oceans or the seas will be raging. The Bible says that men's hearts will begin to fail them for fear when they see these ominous things coming upon the earth. The context is profound. It is a quick succession of global events that are going to be cataclysmic.
One thing that is talked about quite often and misinterpreted quite often is the natural disasters that will happen in the end times.
Arguably, one of the most commonly discussed natural signs in the end days is the dramatic increase of earthquakes around the world, something that in geological time would be statistically unprecedented if it were actually happening during what many believe is the last generation.
That in the last days there'd be an increase in great earthquakes. Jesus used verbiage that means bigger earthquakes in unusual places. We're looking at things regarding, for example, greater hurricanes, greater typhoons, things that in nature you can sense that things are coming undone. And yet, if you looked at it naturally, you would say, well, this is due to global warming, or this is due to man's bad stewardship of the earth. But yet the Bible said as we approached the end, this is exactly what we would see, which, by the way, that preempts man's involvement.
The scriptures do tell us that earthquakes, specifically earthquakes, will increase in frequency and in intensity. Now, it describes the pattern of earthquakes as labor pains.
But the idea here is when they're describing these various birth pains, a lot of it has to do with natural disaster type events like earthquakes and wars and famine. And we've always had these things. So people ask, well, how is now any different than before? What you do have is, as with birth pains, is you have an increase in the frequency and in the severity. At the same time as these are increasing in intensity and frequency, you have the convergence of other events. And so you see we have all these things coming together at the same time.
But wait a minute. Hasn't the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, gone on record to state that this is not occurring? That no such increase in earthquakes have been detected around the world?
Because this is such a debated topic, the USGS gave a press release saying that this was not occurring. As a result, we actually decided to take the USGS data, millions of data points, spent months downloading it, analyzing it, graphing it, studying it. The results were absolutely terrifying.
Despite what you may have heard in the past, this is the compiled data from the USGS from over the last 100 years. Keep in mind that we're not talking about the millions of microtremors that can now be detected from the distribution of more numerous and sensitive sensors, but strictly data from the larger earthquakes that can be felt by people, beginning at 6.3 and up on the Richter scale, that could be easily detected by early 19th century sensors from virtually anywhere in the world. This data shows what the USGS and other organizations do not want you to see.
It shows that the earthquakes are increasing in intensity and they are increasing in frequency. This is exactly the description that was prophesied. I don't believe the USGS was intentionally lying.
There are so many opportunities every day for us to act in the interest of the environment.
We just have to open our eyes to them. Hi, I'm Melissa Tan. I'm a TV host and a climate action and sustainability advocate. So what I try to help people with is translating awareness into action. Sustainability needs to be woven into every part of our lives. And being in the mainstream, I get to connect with brands and other communities that may not know so much about sustainability. Everyone has multiple opportunities every single day to change the system that we live in.
Lying to the public, I think they are in denial of their own data.
In fact, in recent years, some seismologists have even come forward to admit that in truth, there is indeed an increase in large earthquakes globally, and even revealed cases where big earthquakes are believed to have triggered additional quakes. However, many felt there was not enough of a concern to present this data through official public releases. But there is reason for concern, and even prophetic details within the scriptures insinuating that this very occurrence is the catalyst for even more unprecedented heavenly signs and events to come. Mainly, prophecies in the end of days foretell that the stars would be darkened, the moon would turn red as blood, and the sun would become black as if it were covered by sackcloth. Unmistakable signs that would not be regional, but rather global in nature.
But what I realized is that the moon turns blood red when you look at it through a filter of ash. And this has been well documented. And also the sun looks like it's covered with sackcloth when it's covered with a layer of ash. So where do we see in scripture an event that speaks about such a thing happening? Well, it's in Revelation chapter 9. Revelation chapter 9 tells us that smoke will come out, like the smoke out of a great furnace, and then it's going to cover the sun and the moon and the stars.
And with what one might expect from the details offered within the prophetic timeline, we are told exactly what causes these signs. Smoke that rises from the earth, caused by an increase in earthquakes that trigger unprecedented volcanism.
The earthquake data is a precursor to something that is even far more devastating. Isaiah talks about worldwide volcanism, volcanism that puts ash in the air.
It's interesting when you hear scientists talk about the eruption of Yellowstone, but it's just there, it's bubbling. There's not a question of if it's going to blow up, it's a question of when it's going to blow up. And when that happens, that so much ash will come out of it that it's going to cover all of North America. It will kind of be like a nuclear winter scenario. And so it'll cover it so much that the sun will be darkened. And of course, if you have ash up there and you look up at the moon, what's it going to look like? It's going to look blood red. So we actually have observation. This is called science, right? When you observe something, we can observe what happens when the moon is filtered by ash. It turns blood red. When the sun is filtered by ash, it looks like it's covered with sackcloth. And you look at the stars, you can't see them because they're just not bright enough to come through that. You can look at the pictures of the volcanic eruptions that took place in Iceland, and you can see that the sun, it's really dark.
And in addition to the thousands of volcanoes all over the world that could potentially be triggered by an increase in magnitude and frequency of great earthquakes, the eruption of a supervolcano would also easily get the job done.
Sail to the edge of the world, beneath the magical light of the Norway's coastal lifeline, into the wild, the spectacle of nature, Svalbard Express and the North Cape.
And though researchers seem to place a lot of attention on the one located beneath Yellowstone National Park in the United States, it's not the only one. And not all supervolcanoes are on land either. fact, there is another one that researchers are currently studying, and this one, named Tamu Massif, located in the Pacific Ocean, is currently the largest single volcano ever discovered on Earth. This underwater volcano is about the size of the state of New Mexico and was hiding right under our noses. What's concerning, though, is that not only are up to 90% of Earth's volcanoes believed to be located underwater, but most of them are still undiscovered. This leads to a high probability that other supervolcanoes, still unknown to researchers, are active and lurking in the depths of our oceans.
The eruption of a supervolcano under the ocean is actually described in part of the prophetic timeline in Revelation. Now, if this happens, it will destroy a good percentage of the ocean's fish and wildlife.
Wow.
Chillingly, during the period of wars and rumors of war, economic instability and increased earthquakes, Revelation does indeed foretell of not only signs in the heavens and disasters on land, but also one that happens underwater that is so devastating it results in the death of 1/3 of all sea life in the oceans. Something that even researchers in various scientific fields agree could indeed occur with the eruption of an underwater supervolcano, as volcanic gas and debris will no doubt consist of massive amounts of toxic chemicals and sulfur dioxide, which is deadly to most sea life, especially as it travels with the ocean currents.
So what we see in the last few hundred prophecies are several frameworks coming together based on the future prophetic timeline. We see that the world is going to be embraced in fear. Peace is removed from the world. We see global wars popping up all over the planet and rumors of even more wars. We see economic situations all over the planet where countries are starting to collapse, where they will have to do something about it. We see an increase in tectonic activity, earthquake activity around the planet. We see the precursors of all of these frameworks happening.
But as all of the pieces of the prophetic puzzle converge, what is the grand picture? Where is all this leading? The prophetic timeline states that these unfolding events, the convergence of global conflicts, economic collapse, and unprecedented natural disasters, is not actually the end, but will rather complete the foundation necessary for a swift global change, unlike any other time in history.
Okay, this was published on June the 8th this year, guys. So it's only a couple of weeks old.
That leads to the rise of a one-world government.
Revelation talks about this idea that there is a type of global government. And we see in our world of instability where there's this desire to link one another for safety, for security.
When all of these things converge, the world will cry out for peace and safety. They will want to be protected. They will want economic freedom. They need a new world order.
There's a sense in the world by many people that there are so many different areas currently spinning out of control. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel talked about how global chaos seems to be the new norm. In other words, there's this feeling of instability. And out of instability, people often want stability. Out of chaos comes order. And so people are looking for something to give that to them.
Change often comes out of necessity, and the idea of a global government has actually been on the table for quite some time amongst world leaders, and the foundation for this new system already exists. The best example of this today is the United Nations, which was formed in 1945 as a response to World War II and the outcry to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. It was believed that if the world can work together, we could end conflict and instability. An idea that to this very day, many leaders and elitists around the world take very seriously as the only long-term solution for humankind's survival. And the very concept has been changing the political landscape for decades, whether you know it or not.
So the only solution, logical solution, is actually part of the prophetic timeline. It talks about a one world order or one world government. It doesn't mean that there's going to be one nation on earth. All the nations will still be there, and all the presidents and all the cabinets will be there. However, there will be an overriding authority, an overriding law that will apply to every single nation.
Think the idea is nothing more than a radical conspiracy theory. The system is already alive and well in the form of the European Union. Conceived and formed in the name of mainly financial stability, many European countries have united together while retaining their own leaders, cultural influences, and borders, however, adopting a universal new currency to share amongst them. More importantly, though, they created a new court system and authority that can supersede the will of each individual country. Not only is the formation of the UN and the EU the very embodiments of precisely what prophecy foretold would happen in the last days, but this model, in the name of peace, safety, and stability, will eventually be applied on a global scale.
And there's a sense that we're ready for it. Whereas in the past, we might have been more independent, more free. But now, because of the world situation, we're willing to accept a new order, a new way of doing things.
But if we are living in the last days, then there must be radical political change occurring right now. And surely, a superpower like the United States, which is heavily involved in world affairs, isn't partaking in such an agenda. If that's what you think, well, you would be wrong.
One of the greatest overseeing authorities that you can have today is who controls the internet. Because whoever controls the internet controls and can limit what you say. Now keep in mind that almost all business transactions on the entire planet are internet-based. So whoever controls the internet...
Like YouTube controls YouTube, and look how many times they put me in strikes because of community standards, but the videos I get strikes for, the original content's still up by the original channels. So yeah, it's really bad. This what do you call it? Censorship. It's really bad.
Directly or indirectly controls the world's economy. So this is one step away from global financial control.
The United States is often referred to as the father of the internet. And since its inception in the late 1970s, the US has virtually monopolized the development of all new web-based technologies, and for the most part, defines and controls the technology and laws that govern banking systems, financial transactions for all web and retail-based business, and permits freedom of speech, which is protected under the US Constitution. One would think that a nation with such influence over the internet would continue to retain as much control as possible, but through behind closed doors discussions between the US government and outside influences, the United States has recently decided to give up that control to a private organization called ICANN, which most believe will be influenced by globally cooperating and overseeing authorities like the UN.
And we have just handed all of our authority to another party. Why would the United States hand over that kind of control to another entity? It probably makes sense to the governments of the world. See, the governments, they look at our trends. They look at the financial problems. They look at everything from a global perspective. They look at nations, economies going up and down. They see terror. They see all the problems that us people don't pay any attention to. It's more certain than not that they have already concluded a while back that there is no hope for all the individual nations of the world individually being sovereign. They must cooperate in order to solve these problems. So when we see that the United States has transferred all control over the internet, including all the financial information, to another entity, it doesn't make sense to us, but it makes sense to the world authorities who are now merging, because it can't be merged overnight. It's being merged in slow incremental values, so that in the end, it's a very easy transition for the average citizens on Earth to accept. But I believe this has been in the works for quite a while, but they're not doing it because it was prophesied. It was absolutely prophesied. They're doing it because it's the logical thing to do to take care of the citizens of Earth.
And what of the freedoms of Americans regarding free speech on the internet? Well, many believe a globally controlled internet will of course result in a globally controlled standard of what one can and cannot say online, all in the name of global stability, of course.
Essentially, what has happened is that the United States gave away the ability to control the free speech of the American citizens. This is nothing but one step away of censorship, where we could be, in the future, controlled by another authority. They will tell us what is allowed and what is not allowed. In other words, if your actual speech is no longer under the control of the laws of your country, it's moving toward a one world government.
But is it really that surprising? The populations of the world have already been crying out for change. And change is exactly what we'll get.
And so there's this desire, a readiness for change. And the Bible says that when that change happens, unfortunately, it's not going to be good. There's going to be new power structures in the world, a new order of the way we do commerce, the way the political alignment of nations are. Those things are all to change. And I think people are ready for it, but I don't think they're aware of what the eventual ramifications of those changes are.
So what are those ramifications? After all, most people are beginning to believe that in theory, this should usher in a new age of equality and stability. So just as it was believed that the formation of the EU would end regional instability, doubling down on the rise of a new world order will also be perceived as the solution to worldwide peace. But according to the prophetic timeline, only now will the stage finally be set for the conclusion of prophecy and the fulfillment of our faith.
This fate was never forced upon us. We chose it willingly. The one world government wasn't like what you would expect, but nothing ever is.
It's true.
There was no new united Earth flag or erased national borders. There was no evil government that enslaved or tracked the human race. Most of that we did to ourselves already.
Good point.
In reality, it was a unity that felt far more natural, like a global awakening that we were all in this together. In the name of stability, we created new unions and globally superseding laws that everyone believed would protect us. We believed that the only way to have a perfect world was to create it ourselves. But just as with attempts found within the pages of ancient history, our modern-day Babel was destined to fail. I realized that despite what we hoped for or want to believe, the world is a prison, and we are all sentenced to death. So, it was only after losing everything and everyone that I realized the world can't save me. It never could. But even amongst the darkness, there is a light. And it wasn't until I truly let my life go that I was able to find it. A way and a truth that finally set me free from these chains.
I'll come back to this, guys.
Discover a smooth espresso with a hint of caramel for an indulgent taste pleasure. Nor a masterpiece in taste.
Lifetime. The tomb of Caiaphas, the high priest of the Jewish people, who the Gospels state sent Jesus to the Romans to be crucified. 2 nails were found
Okay, Jay, God bless. Say hello to your kids for me.
in the tomb. Could they be the nails that crucified Jesus? This is one of the secrets of Christianity being unearthed by investigative journalist Simka Yakubovich. From deserts to tombs, from Rome to the Holy Land, Simka tracks down the truth behind historical myths, long-held beliefs, and some of the greatest biblical stories ever told.
In 1990, here in Jerusalem, just a few meters down this hill, workers building a park, now called the Peace Park, made the most amazing archaeological discovery. They found a 2,000-year-old burial tomb. But it wasn't just the burial tomb of anybody. It was the burial tomb of someone mentioned in the Gospels, the high priest Caiaphas. And he's the man that, according to the Gospels, is partially responsible for sending Jesus to the cross.
For nearly 2,000 years, Caiaphas' tomb was left undisturbed. Then, in 1990, construction workers stumbled upon a rather large burial site. The Israeli Antiquities Authority, or IAA, sent out archaeologists to excavate the site. What they found was a 1st century Jewish tomb. Inside, there were 4 kohims, or burial niches, and inside these, there were 12 ossuaries, or bone boxes. These limestone coffins, where the bones of the dead are laid, included the ossuary which bears the inscription, Joseph, son of Caiaphas.
That story made headlines. But here's a story that didn't make headlines. Nobody reports that, in fact, nobody knows if that tomb still exists. Archaeologists don't know if it was destroyed when the park was built. Nobody cares. And here's something else that no media whatsoever reported. Inside that tomb, they found 2 Roman nails. Wait a minute, they found 2 nails in the tomb of the man who sent Jesus to the cross and nobody reports it? Why? And what's more, where are they?
The first stop in any investigation involving an Israeli archaeological site is the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. It is headquarters for the Israeli Antiquities Authority. These archives house the original reports of every archaeological excavation, supervised by the IAA. Simka locates the 1990 Caiaphas tomb archaeological file. In it, he discovers the original drawing of the tomb. He also finds the final unedited report. And this includes detailed drawings, measurements, and photographs. And although the 2 Roman nails are mentioned, there are no photographs, measurements, drawings, or any information as to their current whereabouts. The main find is the now famous ossuary inscribed with the name Joseph, son of Caiaphas. The Christian Gospels simply call him Caiaphas. The first-century historian Josephus mentions a high priest called Joseph Caiaphas. What's written on the ossuary, however, is Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Believing Josephus is closer to the truth, scholars generally agree that despite the different versions, this is the bone box of the man who sent Jesus to the cross. To understand why Caiaphas would do such a thing, we have to understand the specific historical context in which the confrontation between Jesus and Caiaphas took place. The date was 30 AD, and Judea was under Roman occupation. Even the Jewish religious elite had to answer directly to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The Roman authorities had appointed Caiaphas to the high priesthood, the most prestigious and powerful position a Jew could hold. According to the Gospels, on the Jewish holiday of Passover, Jerusalem was bursting with religious fervor, and supported by a large gathering of followers, Jesus came to the temple, the holiest site in all of Judaism. He drove the cattle herders and dove sellers out, overturned the tables of the money changers. Then he warned the Romans, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Talking to the Roman authorities in this way was tantamount to a call for revolt. There was a near riot, and Caiaphas, to keep order, has Jesus arrested and put on trial. Jesus is hastily convicted of inciting opposition to the Romans and turned over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The Gospels state that Pilate sends Jesus to the cross and famously washes his hands of the deed. Caiaphas is left to bear the burden. We don't know whether he was or wasn't troubled by the outcome of his decision.
This ossuary, which has an archaeological connection with the Gospels, was excavated in the 1990s from the promenade in the southern part of Jerusalem. There is an inscription, you can see it on the side of the ossuary. It mentions Caiaphas. Caiaphas, who was the high priest in the time of Jesus, and Jesus is mentioned to be judged by Caiaphas.
The ossuary has been sent around the world, and millions of onlookers have had a chance to view it in person, witnessing up close what scholars believe to be the first ever discovery of a man who came in contact with Jesus. But is it really the ossuary of the man who sent Jesus to the cross? To answer that question, Simca meets with David Mevera, a curator at the Israel Museum.
Here's my question. How are you so convinced that this is the Caiaphas?
It is a rare name. It's a name that we know from both Jewish sources and from the New Testament. And it is good in dating and timing for that period. And the most elaborate ossuary, very luckily for us, had twice an inscription on it, naming Joseph, son of Caiaphas, the one that we know from the New Testament. So it's definitely the tomb, as all tombs were, of a clan. It's a priestly clan. So the Caiaphas clan were buried in that tomb.
Scholars generally agree with Dr. Mevera. Caiaphas is a rare name, and the ossuary is very ornate, befitting a high priest. But what happened to the nails found inside the tomb? A starting point would be to find the location of the tomb itself. In search of the nails of the crucifixion, Simca is on his way to the Peace Park to look for the tomb. He has 2 clues. First, according to the archaeological report, there should be a playground nearby. But even if he finds the playground, how does he identify the tomb if it's been covered up? The second clue is provided by Jewish religious law. According to this law, before sealing a tomb, the archaeologist must insert a nephesh or pipe for the free flow of spirits that once inhabited the tomb. The nephesh is somewhere in this park, but where?
Okay guys, this is it. At least I hope it's it. There's supposed to be some kind of children's park or something nearby, and we're looking for a green pipe sticking out of the ground. Each one of us grab one of these terraces, and let's find a tomb.
Even if they are in the right place, what are the odds that the pipe is still accessible and not overgrown with bushes? But if the pipe and the playground can be found together, then the Caiaphas tomb would be rediscovered.
Welcome to the best restaurant in town, Your Kitchen. Chicken tikka tray bake, Charlotte style, in with the veg, and now it's an adventure. A flavoursome pour, and that's how you bake the extraordinary.
Look, here's the playground.
Hey guys, found a pipe.
Looks like this is our pipe. Just saw another pipe by the playground over there. Looks similar.
Another pipe?
No, but then there's two tombs, you understand?
There seems to be two tombs close to one another. One of them is the Caiaphas tomb. Given that his intention is to put a camera down the pipe to look for the missing Roman nails, Simca has to ascertain whether the pipe is clear or obstructed.
Something is blocking it. We need a GPR, we need ground penetrating radar. But the good thing is this is pretty
The
low.
pipes indicate that the Caiaphas tomb was not destroyed in 1990 by the people building this park. In the original report, there is a mention of a second tomb found near the Caiaphas tomb. But the ceiling was collapsed, and it was deemed unsafe. Ground-penetrating radar should reveal which tomb is the collapsed one, and which is the Caiaphas tomb. So Simca has brought in GPR specialists to help determine whether what lies below the pipe may actually be the Caiaphas tomb. First, they go to the tomb that is farthest from the playground.
So it may be quite exciting because we may have an excavated and an unexcavated tomb. Basically, what I'm hoping is that you and your work can throw some light on
Ground-penetrating radar can be used to determine whether areas below the surface hold ancient archaeological sites.
Go!
GPR works by bouncing sound waves through rock.
Okay, next line.
Okay, the volume's there problem. What happened there? Hang on. Oh, it's on mute. Well. No, it's on their end. Hang on. Come on, yeah, back. Got to reboot. The volume's not going.
Nails used in crucifixion.
Okay, the sound does come back.
I myself, I disregard the story of ropes. You know, for crucifixion,
Invest in your forever home today at Winning Appliances end of financial year sale. Outstanding offers from AEG, Wiesel, Fisher & Paykel's.
I think they were using nails. They were using probably short nails for the palm of the hand and longer nails for the heel bone.
Classic Jesus painting one going through the hand is more accurate.
I believe so.
According to Professor Hershkovitz, we learn from the crucified heel bone that there were at least 4 crucifixion nails used, 2 on the heels on either side of the upright post, and at least 1 or 2 on each hand. And we now know from the heel bone that nails had to be at least 12 centimeters long for the heels. but we still don't know how big the hand nails had to be. Now that Simca knows what a crucifixion nail looks like, he heads back to the Rockefeller Museum. Archaeology is all about context and clusters of artifacts. If Simca is ever going to figure out the mystery of the missing nails from the Caiaphas tomb, and whether they might be the nails of the crucifixion, he has to find out what other artifacts were found with the nails. And here, there is no lack of detailed information, including the nails. The report lists 5 items. All of them have to do with the afterlife. The first find mentioned is an oil lamp. Oil lamps were used to commemorate the dead. The second artifact is a glass perfume bottle. These expensive bottles were associated with women. Unlike today, each woman had her own perfume mixture, so it is likely that the scent of a woman was associated with her soul. After all, perfume is associated with scent, and scent in Jewish tradition is associated with the afterlife. The next item is the most surprising. One would not expect to find it in the tomb of a Jewish high priest. It is a Roman coin found in the skull of a woman buried in the tomb. A coin in the skull is common to pagan burials, not Jewish ones. Coins were placed under the tongue of the deceased so that the soul of the dead could pay the boatman when crossing the mythical river Styx in Hades. After the flesh rotted, the coin fell into the skull. The presence of the coin in the skull shows that this family of Jewish high priests were influenced by Roman burial practices. So the coin was also associated with the afterlife. And then there were the nails. What possible connection could they have with the afterlife? As it turns out, in first century Judaism, only one type of nail was associated with the afterlife: nails used in crucifixion. They were considered to be a powerful talisman, protecting their owner in this life and the next. Taken together, the ossuary, the lamp, the glass bottle, and the coin all tell the same story: an obsession with the afterlife. It seems the only reason that nails would be part of this cluster is that they were used to crucify someone. And since Caiaphas is associated with only one crucifixion, could they be the nails that were driven into Jesus?
You're excavating Caiaphas' tomb. You find iron nails. You think, nails.
You know, you could say, look, crucifying Jesus was a small event in Caiaphas' life. He's the priest. He has many things to do. Jesus was not important. He's important to us, but to him, he was just one more guy he got rid of. I don't think that's the case. The day it happened, this is going to become the biggest thing in my life. This is going to haunt me to my grave. But I think by the time he died, that act was major. So if there were crucifixion nails in the Caiaphas tomb, I don't think most of us would say, oh, well, this is just a coincidence. It's a little indication of something much bigger.
To see if the nails were left in the Caiaphas tomb, Simca is attempting to lower cameras into the so-called soul pipe. But the soul pipe over the Caiaphas tomb is blocked. Now that the GPR has shown Simca where the Caiaphas tomb is, Simca has to get around the blockage of the pipe. So he calls a pipe expert, namely a plumber. Because there is an elbow at the top of the pipe, Ezra the plumber can't get his equipment down. So he elects to cut a hole in the side of the pipe, just above ground level, which can later be welded shut.
It looks like there's just garbage in it.
Yeah, well. With the obstruction gone, Simca might be able to lower a camera down the soul pipe and into the Caiaphas tomb, hopefully revealing the missing nails.
That's good, it looks clear. I see the curve, it looks empty, I didn't expect it.
Simca now gathers his team that includes experts at working robotic cameras. After due preparation, they're finally ready to put a camera down the pipe. Bill Tarrant is one of these experts.
All right, so go for it.
All right, we're gonna go for it.
His high-resolution camera, once lowered into the tomb, may detect the nails if they're still there.
Okay, there we go. So hopefully you have beautiful images for me.
Okay. Going through one pipe. There's the other part of the pipe.
With these clear, high-resolution images from the camera, are Simca and his team on the verge of finding the nails of the crucifixion? Simca is investigating a first-century Jerusalem burial tomb, identified as the last resting place of the high priest Caiaphas, who sent Jesus to the cross. Strangely, 2 Roman nails found in the cave, possibly associated with crucifixion, have gone missing, and the cave itself has been covered over. Simca has located the tomb and a pipe that leads into it. In the hope of locating the nails, a high-resolution camera has been lowered into the pipe. At first, everything looks good.
There's the other part of the pipe.
Sitting at the elbow, the camera can now see into the second pipe.
I'm zooming in.
Unfortunately, spikes used to secure the joints of the pipe prevent the camera from traveling further. Simca now has to call for a smaller, more flexible camera, but it has to come from another town, so everything has been put on hold.
Okay, coffee break. Okay.
Ignored by the majority of scholars is the fact that there wasn't one, but 2 ossuaries with the Caiaphas inscription found in the tomb. A simple ossuary bearing the name Caiaphas, and an ostentatious ossuary bearing the name Joseph, son of Caiaphas. The first-century historian Josephus mentions a high priest, Joseph Caiaphas. This is taken by scholars to be one and the same as the Joseph, son of Caiaphas, buried in the fancy ossuary. So, they have identified this ossuary with the Jewish high priest from the time of Jesus. But the Gospels do not call the high priest who sent Jesus to the cross Joseph Caiaphas or Joseph, son of Caiaphas. They simply called that high priest Caiaphas.
Can it be that although the Gospel writers talk about one high priest called Caiaphas, there were actually two from the same family? One was indeed ostentatious, but the other one was modest. Can it be we've been focusing on the wrong Caiaphas all along?
To find out more about the real Caiaphas of the Jesus story, Simca now travels what would have been a 20-day journey at the time of Jesus to modern-day Turkey and on to a small town called Antioch. Early Jesus followers fled here to escape Roman persecution, and it is here that the Christian movement itself was born. Simca meets New Testament scholar Barry Wilson. He's hoping to get a better sense of the historical Caiaphas, to determine which ossuary belongs to the high priest who confronted Jesus.
Fantastic mountain, riddled with tunnels.
Those holes?
These were the escape routes of early Christians when they were fleeing from the Romans. It's a fantastic network within this mountain.
This is where they practiced Christianity before it was an official religion, before it was recognized.
That's right. They had to remain underground. They used caves as churches here. This was the earliest Vatican.
The Christians who worshipped here had access to texts that were later suppressed by the Western Church. One of these deals with Caiaphas.
There's a very interesting document that dates from the 6th century, possibly earlier. It's preserved in an Arabic source. And this is an amazing document because it starts off by saying that this is the book of the high priest, the one called Caiaphas. So it's a book that's allegedly written by the high priest Caiaphas.
He's the bad guy.
He was the bad guy. He was implicated with Pontius Pilate at the trial of Jesus. But he says in this document about Jesus, this is the one whom we adore. This is the one who for our sakes became incarnate. This is the one who for our sakes redeemed us and who has blessed us with everlasting compassion. This is the high priest, the Jewish high priest, one of the two most powerful leaders in Judea of the time, presented as speaking with a Christian voice.
This text, representing a little-known Christian tradition, portrays Caiaphas not as a villain, but as a devout follower of Jesus. But if this text is accurate, this means that the Gospels distorted the truth about Caiaphas.
Well, you know, Caiaphas' tomb has been found.
Yes.
Did you know that there were nails?
No, I didn't know that.
They've disappeared.
They disappeared. That's a remarkable absence.
Why would it be so remarkable? If an Israeli archaeologist said, it's just nails, what would you say to them?
Well, I would want to find out what was so significant about these nails that it would be associated with the burial of Caiaphas.
For you, this is an important question.
It's an important question.
You wouldn't brush it off.
No.
You wouldn't lose the nails.
No. No. The nails are an important clue to something, some link to some other historic person.
There's only one crucified person that Caiaphas is linked to.
Yeah. That's linked to Jesus.
Armed with the knowledge that there is an alternative Christian tradition depicting Caiaphas as a good guy, and knowing that in the Caiaphas tomb a modest ossuary was found, Simca now heads back to Jerusalem to see what more he can learn about the real Caiaphas. Historian Dr. Helen Bond has spent much of her career examining the life of this prominent high priest. In her writings, she argues that the Gospel's portrayal of Caiaphas is historically inaccurate. She now takes Simca to a church, which according to Christian tradition, is built where Caiaphas once lived. Since Caiaphas was also a judge, one would expect to find holding cells under his home, and indeed, that's precisely what archaeologists have found here. Jesus could have been held right here the night he was arrested.
The Gospels tend to caricature the high priest. He's shown as jealous of Jesus. He's completely corrupt. The whole trial narrative in Mark's Gospel, for example, is a kangaroo court. It's a terrible picture of a Jewish high priest that comes over. It's a long way from historical accuracy. And the reason for that, I think, is that all of the Gospels are written at the end of the 1st century, at a time when Christians and Jews are starting to go their separate ways. And so in a way, Caiaphas is sort of a victim of this. He becomes caught up in all of this negativity and portrayed in a very negative way. And I think Caiaphas has suffered because of that. There's nobody particularly interested in rehabilitating him.
So what if Caiaphas never meant for Jesus to be crucified, merely arrested? What if, as the alternative Caiaphas tradition suggests, he became a follower rather than a persecutor of Jesus? Perhaps by re-examining the limestone coffins, Simca will be able to determine which Caiaphas is the one who confronted Jesus.
We have now located Caiaphas' tomb by identifying a pipe that leads into it. Maybe by re-examining the ossuaries that came from that tomb, we will be able to determine whether Caiaphas is really the bad guy of the Gospels, or whether he was a good guy that took 2 of the crucifixion nails with him to the grave.
To analyze and compare the 2 ossuaries, Simca has come to the Israel Museum, where both are currently stored. He is first shown the famous ossuary scholars believe once held the bones of the historic Caiaphas. Remarkably, after 2,000 years, it's in unbelievably good shape.
Look at this. I've seen a lot of ossuaries, and this is really
beautiful ever.
Yeah, it is one of the most beautiful I've ever seen. Yeah, look how elaborate.
Many of the fancier ossuaries are decorated with what scholars call rosettes. Although their exact meaning is not known, many scholars dismiss the design as merely decorative, an ostentatious display of wealth and status. Simca now examines the famous inscription.
See, this is what we couldn't see when it was on the shelf. It's so clear. It's Joseph, son of Aramaic, Bar Kaifa. There it is.
The evidence seems to support the argument that this ossuary held the bones of the historic Caiaphas. But Simca is now shown the second, more modest Caiaphas ossuary.
The amazing thing about this one is that this one actually is more consistent with what it says in the Gospels. Because there it doesn't say Joseph, son of Caiaphas, it just says Caiaphas.
Incredibly, it is this inscription, which just states Caiaphas, that matches the Gospels. Scholars have ignored it because they prefer first-century historian Josephus as a source, and they are dazzled by the fancy ossuary. But it is the name inscribed on this simple ossuary that is more consistent with the Gospels.
It's beautiful and it's modest, and this one is consistent not with the bad guy Caiaphas, but with the good guy Caiaphas.
This second Caiaphas ossuary also has rosettes, though clearly less elaborate. Still, they are consistent with the status of a high priest. Intriguingly, there's also an enigmatic symbol between the two rosettes, which has never been decoded. It shows 5 temple-like steps supporting a pillar, with 7 cornices, and between the cornices, 6 arrows pointing heavenward.
It definitely has here symbolism. It has several steps leading up, and with arrows pointing heavenward.
As early as the 1st century, the pillar becomes a symbol for Jesus of Nazareth and the emerging church. Later, it even makes an appearance in the heart of the Vatican, in Michelangelo's painting in the Sistine Chapel. But there is yet one more curious element to the exterior design. 2 seemingly insignificant circular patterns, one on each side of the face of the ossuary. Interestingly, they are not positioned at the 4 corners of the ossuary's facade, as you would expect from something simply ornamental. Instead, there are only 2 of them, and they appear on either side of the pillar. According to the authoritative Rachmani catalog of ossuaries, the circles represent 2 nail heads. Simca is taken aback by his discovery and realizes that he doesn't know where in the tomb the missing Roman nails were found. Were they found somewhere close to the ostentatious ossuary, or were they found closer to the more modest ossuary? Looking at the initial field report, written at the tomb's discovery, the evidence is inconclusive. 1 nail was found outside the fancy Caiaphas ossuary. Incredibly, the other was found inside an ossuary. But strangely, that ossuary is not identified. Why? Could it be that it was the plain Caiaphas ossuary?
What do you make of a nail in an ossuary?
At all sites, anywhere in Jerusalem, I've dug right here in Jerusalem, we find 10 nails a day. But we're not in a Jewish tomb. We're in a residential area like this. I'm sure many nails were found right behind me when this was excavated. But if there's a nail in the ossuary, then it opens another possibility, that there's something like the coins in the mouth of the skull, some sort of superstition going on here. The belief attested in a number of sources that a crucifixion nail has a great magical power to ward off evil, to ward off bad luck, maybe to help you in the afterlife.
That's completely missing the point that the nails are assumed to be the nails that pierced Jesus. So that's completely missing the point. Typical Jew answer.
It's tax time at Bunnings Trade. Get in for amazing tax time deals like a Makita 18-volt brushless rotary hammer.
Can it be that it is the simple ossuary that belonged to the high priest, and that the secret of the tomb is that Caiaphas took Jesus' nails with him to the grave. To answer that, we need the nails, but the nails are missing, and there is no photograph of them in the original report. In the hope that the photographs do exist, Simca now tracks down the original photographer of the site. The photographer is Gero Nalbandian. He was hired by the archaeologists to photograph all the artifacts found in the tomb.
So your mission was to shoot all the artifacts?
Yes.
From the tomb?
Yes.
Okay, let's see what you have. That's the ossuary?
Yes. This is the oil lamp. This is the coin.
And the nails? Did you shoot the nails?
No.
There were no nails?
They did not show me nails.
But you asked for all the artifacts?
Yes. What the artifacts it was there from the tomb, they give it to me, I photographed it.
No nails?
No nails, I did not see them.
So the nails mysteriously disappeared before Gero had a chance to photograph them for the final report.
Something doesn't make sense. Nails just don't disappear. Israeli archaeologists aren't bad. They're good archaeologists. These are not simple nails that were found in a wooden coffin or a building site or in a boat. These were special Roman nails in Caiaphas' tomb, one of them inside one of the ossuaries. I just can't believe that they simply disappeared.
As night falls, Simca gets back to the business of introducing a small camera in the now covered-up tomb of Caiaphas. After hours of waiting, the second camera finally arrives. It is much smaller and more flexible than the one that got stuck earlier. Called a push camera, it has a better chance of moving past the obstructions in the pipe. Working into the night, the crew is finally able to maneuver the push camera past the screws that stopped them before.
Oh. Yeah, okay, Abby, tilt down. More. Okay, hold it right there. There it is. I see what's going on. Here's the ground, the way they found it. They went inside and they pulled out the ossuaries, and there's the entrance.
Simca can now clearly see the outside of the tomb of the high priest Caiaphas. But there's a problem.
That is cement. Because they had to put cement here to fortify whatever they were doing.
The walls are reinforced with concrete.
You can get past that. Can you get past that, Abby? Can you go a little bit more?
The camera probe inside the pipe that leads to Caiaphas' tomb has hit another problem.
That is cement.
Can you go a little bit more? Can you maneuver it to the side? More, that's it.
The camera won't reach all the way inside the Caiaphas tomb. The only way to do that would be to get an excavation license and drill new holes. Even if that were possible, the application process would take years.
Okay, so 3 meters, and there's probably another, what, 2 meters?
From what we're looking ahead, yeah.
The opening is right here.
So
the tomb is under this roadway right here.
There's no getting into a tomb paved over by a road. But Simca has learned something.
Now we know it exists. The entrance is unobstructed under this road. The point is, there's only one set of missing artifacts. It's the most important set, and that's the nails.
Right.
Unfortunately, Simca and his crew are unable to gain access to the tomb. If the nails are still inside, we'll never know. But can artifacts from tomb sites simply vanish? Simca has now asked to speak with Zvi Greenhut, the archaeologist who ran the Caiaphas tomb dig. Unfortunately, he has refused an interview. The IAA has offered up fellow archaeologist Gideon Avni to speak in his stead.
In the tomb, there's 2 Roman nails. Okay. Doesn't someone go, wow, I've poured through the material, but there is no measurement or pictures of the nails.
You have to realize, in this country every year you have 300 excavations. The number of artifacts found in these excavations goes to tens of millions. and minor elements like nails either
Not
they were
mine,
lost in the
though.
stage of processing or storage, or they were mixed with some other context. I'm representing this government institution. There was a question asked about this nail. We checked all the records relevant to this tomb, and we discovered that we don't have the nails. Nails can be either lost or found their way into some other registry or whatever.
When you said it could be lost or find itself in some other registry, you mean like not really lost, but internally misfiled in a way?
It's a possibility.
Meaning it could be sitting in some lab or a shelf.
Maybe.
Gideon Avni has made me think. Maybe the nails have been under our noses the whole time. If my hunch is right, and the Israeli archaeologists who were involved in the Caiaphas tomb suspected that the Roman nails found there had something to do with crucifixion, maybe they send them to Professor Herskovitch's lab at Tel Aviv University. Now, he's a forensic anthropologist. He deals with bone, not nails. But crucifixion is where bone meets nail. So maybe someone sent the nails there. Maybe that's the right address for our investigation.
We've been tracking 2 nails that went missing. The Antiquities Authority, they say it's probably misplaced. Did you ever get 2 nails together?
Yes, we have 2 nails together. Yes.
Wow.
From Jerusalem.
Can we go look?
Sure, absolutely.
So these are the nails?
Yes, these are the 2 nails from Jerusalem that arrived to the lab more than 15 years ago from the Second Temple period.
Could it be 18 years ago?
Yeah, could be.
This is the only example of 2 nails arriving together.
Yes.
The fact that they're bent this way, would this be consistent with crucifixion?
It could be.
Why would they bend the nail?
If you put a nail through the palm of the hand, you can easily free the hand. But if you put a nail through the palm of the hand, and then you stick it to the wood, by actually bending the nail, the palm of the hands are attached firmly to the crossbar.
So the fact they're bent is more consistent with crucifixion than if you saw them straight?
Yes, I would say so.
The Caiaphas nails were found in a specific chemical setting. One was outside the limestone ossuaries, and one was inside an ossuary. If these are the Caiaphas nails, one should have a heavy limestone deposit collected from inside the ossuary, and one should be limestone-free, since it was found outside the ossuaries. Incredibly, that's just what Professor Herskovitz finds. One doesn't have limestone on it, but the other one does.
So what do you see? There are remnants of lime on the nail, limestone. Most ossuaries are made of limestone.
Furthermore, Professor Herskovitz finds that the heads of the nails are similar to the only crucifixion nail found anywhere, which is also in Professor Herskovitz's lab. So it seems that these are the missing nails. The nails which may have come from Jesus' cross.
Why is nobody as excited as I am?
Crucifixion is a very sensitive issue from the religious point of view. I believe that most people prefer to leave it aside.
So it seems that religious sensitivities, not science, dictated policy towards these nails.
If Caiaphas kept the nails of Jesus for whatever reasons, he felt bad, he felt it would have healing powers, he felt that this shows he has power over him, whatever, this could be the nails of the crucifixion.
Here on the campus of Tel Aviv University, our investigation is complete. The fact is that the world may be looking at the wrong Caiaphas ossuary. The man buried in the modest one may be the high priest who faced Jesus at his trial. Furthermore, I think we've made the strongest archaeological argument ever that 2 of the nails used in the crucifixion have been found. Was it the ostentatious Caiaphas who kept them as an amulet for the afterlife, or was it modest Caiaphas who kept them as a sign of devotion?
In In the 1st century, Pompeii was the sin city of the Roman Empire. Here, Rome's elite reveled in sex and sadism. Meanwhile, the earliest followers of Jesus were preaching repentance to the Romans and predicting the end of days. And then it happened. The Vesuvius volcano erupted and wiped out Pompeii and neighboring Herculaneum. Was the eruption the best thing that could have happened to Christianity? Did Vesuvius provide Christianity with the launch it needed? This is one of the secrets of Christianity being unearthed by investigative journalist Simka Yakubovich. From deserts to tombs, from Rome to the Holy Land, Simka tracks down the truth behind historical myths, long-held beliefs, and some of the greatest biblical stories ever told.
Volcanic eruptions have been known to influence the spread of religion. During the biblical Exodus, it is said by many that the eruption of Thera in Greece helped Moses by generating catastrophes recorded in the Bible as the plagues. In modern times, the eruption of Krakatoa caused millions to convert to Islam, making Indonesia the most populous Muslim country in the world. What about Christianity? Does it have its own volcano? I think it does.
On the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, the people of Pompeii woke up thinking that it was just another day in this playground of Rome's elites. But by 10 a.m., a slight ash started to cover everything. By 2 in the afternoon, the ash turned coarser, driving people indoors. Others started fleeing the city, but it was too late. By 7:30 the next morning, the volcano sent a gas cloud 20 miles into the air. Boulders of fire then rolled down the side of the mountain, incinerating everything in their path. The bodies of the inhabitants were trapped in cocoons of hot ash, creating these casts that would immortalize the dead. As it turns out, the eruption may have been the catalyst for the spread of Christianity in the Roman Empire. To understand why, we're on the trail of a 2,000-year-old mystery. The investigation begins in the city of Herculaneum, also buried by the eruption. In February of 1938, while digging up the ancient city, archaeologists discovered something that could turn biblical history upside down. Today, the public is kept away from this site. They uncovered the clear imprint of a Christian cross that had been nailed to a wall and then pried loose. This cross can date no later than 79 AD, when the city was covered in ash for 2 millennia. The problem is that scholars believe that the cross, as a Christian symbol, did not come into use until 300 years after Vesuvius. Few people want to challenge this opinion, and yet, in a city that was covered in ash, less than 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, here is a cross, seemingly treated as a Christian symbol.
How could that be anything but a cross? You see actually where it was bolted? When they found it, the floor was still there, and there are images where you had an altar in front of it and a thing to kneel on. It's controversial because it's not supposed to be there, but what else can it be? This establishes crosses in 79.
According to the Church Fathers, the earliest followers of Jesus, who were Jews, used a cross or an X as a symbol of their faith. For them, the X stood for the letter Tau, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The X symbolized the end, perfection, righteousness. The cross at Herculaneum suggests that 300 years before the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and adopted the cross as its symbol, in the Pompeii area, the Hebrew Tau was already morphing into the Gentile or Roman cross we recognize today.
It's the upper room of a wealthy house. It's not really a chapel. I think it's a private bedroom of probably a Jewish or Christian slave. So I think unquestionably, in my mind, this plastered remain is a cross, a T.
But some people will say it was too early, it couldn't be a cross. The cross is much later. Maybe it's a bookshelf. That's what people say. It's a bracket.
That's nonsense if you think about it. You look at the shape of it. This isn't how you would bracket a bookshelf. And then it's pried off the wall. Do you pry your bookshelf off the wall and run with it, when the city's being destroyed? But the plaster tells the story. There's white plaster around it. This is to outline it and to say, this is the center of my devotion. And we have an early Christian text that's been overlooked. It's called the Letter of Barnabas. It's from the late 1st, early 2nd century, so same time as the destruction of Pompeii. But the writer says that the letter T, which symbolizes the cross, stands for Jesus.
To understand what Christians would be doing in the Pompeii area just 49 years after the crucifixion, the detective trail takes us back to where it all started. Jerusalem. In the year 66 AD, in Roman ruled Judea, revolution had broken out. After 4 years of fighting, the Romans captured Jerusalem and its temple, Judaism's holiest site. The Roman general Titus torched the temple and turned hundreds of thousands of Jews into slaves. Among them were the earliest Christians from places like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth. Some of these slaves must have known Jesus. Now they found themselves in places like Rome and Pompeii. They were disgusted by what they saw, a culture where power and violence were the currency of the day, and sex was a religion.
It's almost impossible to know just what to make out of all the sex in Pompeii. The way that just a great phallus can stick out of a wall in a street as you walk.
So, where'd my pee go? Like, I just peed and poof, it's gone.
For highly absorbent 99% research.
You walk past.
If I'm a Christian or a Jew brought in as a slave to Pompeii, I'm walking down streets where there's phalluses, what would I have thought being thrown into the world that was Pompeii?
I think what worries them is how they have to live. Do they have to live as slaves offering sexual services? That's where the real moral crunch will come. That's the grim law of war, that if you're defeated, you are enslaved, you're led off in captivity, and you have to do precisely the things, the giving pleasure to others, that is always unpleasant for you yourself.
For these deeply religious slaves, it must have seemed as if they had stepped into Sodom and Gomorrah. And then, 9 years after the destruction of the Jewish temple, Vesuvius erupted. Ironically, Titus, the very general who had destroyed the temple, was the newly installed emperor of Rome.
It certainly is very clear in the early Christian narrative that the destruction of Pompeii is a consequence of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. What's far more interesting is to see that idea take shape in the Roman consciousness, and particularly in Emperor Titus's increasing paranoia. We're talking about someone who feared fire greatly, and for good reason, given what happened in Vesuvius. He's also facing an epidemic where people are febrile all throughout Rome, and that increasing fire within made Titus take cold baths and actually bury himself in snow. It was as if he was trying to fight back the force of fire itself, because he felt as though there was something he had not fully extinguished in the Temple of Jerusalem, as though this last ember of spirit had survived, and the wrath of the God of Israel was coming for him.
I believe that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 drove thousands of Romans to join Judaism and its newly created sister religion, Christianity, especially Christianity. So I believe that while Paul gets all the credit, it's really Vesuvius that launched Christianity into a world religion. To test my thesis, I've set up a roadmap. I have to find evidence right here that there were Jews in Pompeii prior to the eruption. Why Jews? Let's remember, at the beginning of the movement, they were all Jews, including Jesus and all his disciples. And secondly, I have to find evidence that these newly minted Christians, so to speak, warned their pagan Roman masters of the impending disaster. Why did they have to warn before? Well, because otherwise the Romans wouldn't have seen the eruption of Vesuvius as divine punishment. So let's test the theory and follow the trail of evidence.
We begin with the New Testament. The book of Acts describes the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul. There, it states that he made a point of preaching in busy harbor towns where new ideas would quickly spread. He actually describes coming here to Pozzuoli, the harbor of Pompeii. Scholars believe this journey happened around 60 AD, 6 years prior to the Jewish revolt against Rome, and 19 years before the eruption of Vesuvius.
During the beginning of the 1st century, all the traffic that came from all over the Mediterranean came here through Pozzuoli.
So in the book of Acts, when Paul lands...
He's landing right here. Yeah.
I mean, it's no accident that he's landing here when he's going to Rome.
Right. This is the way people would have traveled. The coast between the Bay of Naples and Rome was too treacherous, and so people would sail here into Pozzuoli and then travel across land to get to Rome.
It says that when Paul landed right over here, he was met by brothers. That means fellow Jews who are followers of Jesus or had converted to this movement.
Definitely Jews coming from the Holy Land to Italy on their way to Rome would be passing through.
That's amazing because that's Christians.
Right. The religion is already spreading pretty quickly.
Before Paul even gets here.
Yeah. This is probably the Ellis Island of the ancient world.
Seeking their fortunes in the capital of the empire, Jews like Paul were heading to Rome in droves. When Paul landed here in the year 60, he was put under house arrest for causing a disturbance. 2 years later, he was released. And 2 years after that, he was beheaded. Paul was probably swept up in the mass persecutions of Christians that followed the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. The archaeological evidence of the fire is here. The Circus Maximus, a massive racetrack that could seat over 250,000 spectators. One night in the year 64, the stables caught fire and the city of Rome burned. The response to the fire tells us there were already a lot of Christians in Rome prior to the Vesuvius eruption.
So this was a fire that destroyed 3/4 of the city.
This is where Nero, according to legend, was fiddling while Rome was burning.
Yes. What does Nero do afterwards? Well, he blames the Christians for the fire.
Now, the thing is, for Nero to blame the Christians in 64, there's got to be enough of them to make that accusation credible, right?
That's what's amazing. I mean, here we are only in 64. In 64.
30 years after the crucifixion.
And here we have him being able to say, this is a group, they're substantial enough, you all know who they are, and you all know that they're troublemakers, they're doing illegal things, and they're the ones who are responsible for this.
These early Christians, like Paul, who were blamed for the fire of Rome, were beheaded, fed to lions, and crucified for pagan Roman entertainment. 2 years after the persecution of the Christians of Rome, the Jews of Judea rose in revolution. 4 years after that, they were defeated. In the year 70 AD, tens of thousands of Jewish slaves were brought to the Italian peninsula. Many of them were early Christians. New evidence suggests that with the help of a volcano, they were about to take over the Roman Empire.
Most historians say that the Apostle Paul launched Christianity in the Roman Empire. But think about it. How could one man convert the most powerful empire the world had ever seen? No matter how effective Paul was at spreading the message of the Gospels, think how much more effective an act of God would be. I think that the eruption of the volcano Vesuvius in 79 AD gave Christianity a huge push. A push that history has forgotten. And the Romans would have perceived that volcanic eruption as an act of an angry God. To be precise, the God of Israel. Payback for Rome's destruction of the temple in Jerusalem just 9 years earlier.
At that time, the Romans torched the Temple of Jerusalem and took tens of thousands of Jews to Rome as slaves. Many of these Jews were early Christians. To commemorate the victory over the God of Israel, the Romans built a number of monuments, including the Colosseum. They used Jewish and Christian slaves, financing the project with monies plundered from the temple. In the year 70, the Colosseum literally went up as the Jerusalem temple came down. And only 100 yards from the Colosseum stands the Arch of Titus. The story carved on its stone surface is a boastful testimonial to the sacking of Jerusalem, a celebration of the looting of the temple's wealth and the persecution of hundreds of thousands of Jewish slaves from Judea.
Well, here we have really fantastically well-preserved example of a triumph procession. And a triumph was a mega parade. There was everybody. There was the emperor. There were slaves from the place that you conquered. There was all the spoils of war that you brought back. There was money. In this case here, they brought back the menorah from the sacking of the fabulously wealthy and ornate temple in Jerusalem.
Rome destroys Jerusalem in 70. Jesus is crucified in 33. We're only talking 37 years.
Right.
Am I right? Some of the people following this procession in chains may have actually heard Jesus preach.
Yes, it's absolutely within the realm of possibility. They definitely could have witnessed, seen, heard Jesus, and then ended up, as fate would have brought them as a slave to Rome.
According to the Gospels, Jesus had predicted the destruction of the temple. Now that it had happened, Jews generally, and in particular the followers of Jesus, were waiting for the Romans to be punished for their deeds. In the meantime, they would have been sent to places like Pompeii, serving as slaves in opulent Roman villas such as this one. Here, the followers of the God of Israel found themselves serving pagans who worshipped many gods.
Every house in Pompeii had a shrine to their domestic gods, the gods of that household. But what you could do is you would have little statuettes of the gods you want to worship, and you could pick and choose. So a lot of merchants would have Mercury because he brought profit.
All these gods are there to protect. There would have been only one group, the Jews and the Jesus followers among the Jews, that would have said, God's not going to protect you. You burned down his house in Jerusalem. You're going to be punished unless you change your ways.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very different way of thinking.
The Romans may not have been thinking about divine punishments, but the slaves were.
There's very clear evidence in the Acts and in other documents that Christianity was a religion that had a major appeal in the slave community.
But it would be hard to get at archaeologically.
In antiquity, there's a hierarchy of ways of writing. So the grandest bit, the public bit, is you take a great big piece of marble and you write in great big letters that high the name of the emperor and the official announcement. Whereas the graffito, with a little scratching thing, maybe a stylus or so on, written on the wall in a hurry by someone who shouldn't have been writing on the wall there, you may just catch a bit of a trace of the suppressed Christian voice.
Professor Wallace is right. The suppressed voice can be heard in overlooked graffiti. The first one on the wall of an ancient toilet.
Here we are in a latrine. I think this is one of the strongest pieces of evidence for the presence of Jews in Pompeii. This whole wall, basically, of the latrine is taken up with a humongous message. It's not a very nice message, but it names a woman named Martha.
Hebrew.
Right, it is Hebrew. And here's what it says. This is the dining room of Martha, and then at the very end, Kakat. She is defecating in her dining room.
So Martha, whoever's writing about Martha, look at Martha. She craps where she eats.
Yeah. But not only do we have the name Martha, triclinium is spelled Triclinum in Latin. It's spelled as it sounds. But here, triclinium has an H in it, so it would be pronounced triclinium instead of triclinium. A Latin speaker from Italy would have never said it that way. They would have just said triclinium. Martha and the person who's writing about her.
Probably both Jews.
Yeah, and probably slaves. And actually, you can see that if you're sitting here using the latrine, you would be looking directly at that wall with this huge inscription that's really hard to miss.
So basically, it gives us hard archaeological evidence that there were Jews, maybe Judeo-Christians, slaves in Pompeii prior to the eruption.
Yes.
So a crudely scratched joke on the wall of a latrine becomes solid evidence that there were Jews and perhaps Christians in Pompeii at the time of the eruption, and they were slaves. That's the key. These slaves may well have been the key players in Rome's conversion to Christianity. Think about it. Slaves like Martha may have heard Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and yet ended up in a Pompeii brothel. I'm convinced that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius that destroyed Pompeii and neighboring Herculaneum also helped launch Christianity in the Roman world. So far, we've shown evidence that Hebrew and perhaps Christian slaves were living in Pompeii at the time of the eruption. We've also seen that one of these slaves had the Hebrew name Martha. The evidence suggests that people like Martha helped convert Rome from paganism to Judaism and especially Christianity. But when she got here, the best Martha
I've always wanted to be an opera singer.
Martha could hope for was to be a household servant. The alternative is life in a brothel.
Here we go. Here we're in the hallway.
It's smaller than her, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the first room.
They had cushions on these beds, right?
They did. There would have been cushions. Pompeii was a really busy city with people traveling through, and this was a place where you could meet people from all over.
Are these free women or slaves?
These are probably slaves.
I know some people see this as erotic. It's quite violent.
Well, if you were a slave in the ancient world, you really didn't have much control over your life. So it was certainly not a very nice existence.
But is there any evidence that some of these women who ended up in this brothel were Christians, brought as slaves after the fall of Jerusalem? Just across the street, there is a building known as the Hotel of the Christians.
We're heading into the atrium. This is called the Hotel of the Christians, partly because there are many small rooms around the atrium, so it's thought that this could have served as some sort of hospitality establishment, but of the Christians, because very early on in 1862, there was discovered a very enigmatic graffito. But there's this one word that has fascinated everyone, Christianos.
This charcoal graffiti had been preserved under ash for 1,800 years until archaeologists uncovered it. Exposed, it became susceptible to the elements.
Because it was written in charcoal, it just needed a few rains and some sun, and it disappeared within 2 years. But in the short time between its discovery and its disappearance, there was only time for 2 experts to make tracings of it. So everyone has been working off of these tracings that were done in 1862.
Then it would be the earliest archaeological attestation to the word Christian anywhere.
Christianos, yeah, as an identity.
Now, the problem was that nobody could make heads or tails of it, correct?
Pretty much. There's a lot of writing, obviously. It's more than one word, but the writing around it seems to be pretty puzzling.
Gibberish. So in 1926, Professor Newbold comes up with the idea that what?
Comes up with the idea that we have an inscription that mentions Christianos that is transliterated Aramaic, and it's written in Latin characters.
Aramaic is a Hebrew-like language that Jesus spoke. According to this theory, to understand the inscription, all we have to do is swap the Latin letters for Aramaic ones.
When you do that, I can even understand from modern Hebrew, it says, a strange mind has overtaken A, doesn't mention who A is, who is now being held as a prisoner among the Christians. Now, that makes a bit of sense to me. If you come with a bunch of guys to a hotel across the street from a brothel, and suddenly one of the guys you're expecting to party with disappears. He's not doing that anymore. He's seen the light. He's born again.
You may very well scratch on the wall.
He's being held prisoner and missing all the fun.
We now have archaeological evidence that some of these sex slaves were fighting back with religion. They were converting some of the pagan Romans to the new religion, Christianity. We now even almost know one of them by name, by his first initial, A. But if some of these Romans were converting to Christianity, what happened to them? What happened to A?
From the texts, we know that wild dogs were let loose on Christians wrapped in animal skins. And amazingly, in nearby Pozzuoli, we have physical evidence of those early Christians. We have ancient graffiti of a man wrapped in an animal skin. Dating to the 1st century AD, this is the oldest graffiti of a crucifixion ever found. It caricatures the person crucified by depicting him with a big nose.
And he was crucified through the heels. That's interesting.
The crucifixion is depicted from behind, so you can clearly see the cross. It was photographed in 1926, but today, as with so many other graffiti finds, nobody seems to know where it actually is. Following the original archaeological report, which states that the crucifixion was scratched on an ancient tavern wall, Simca and Rebecca set out to find it.
It's one of the earliest crucifixion things. I thought we would just drive up to it.
No, I mean, all the authorities I've been talking to, they know nothing about this thing. So I would suggest, let's try over here.
Okay.
Let's try.
Hanno trovato qui in questa zona una serie di taverne.
Per riuscire alla posta.
Ok, this is there.
Grazie.
Grazie. Mille grazie.
Bene.
Ancient, antiqua.
Roberto archeologico. Ok, probabile sì, anche io davvero. Ok, perfetto.
After a few wrong turns, the investigators think they finally found the network of ancient taverns.
These are definitely Roman ruins
Look,
because
you
this
see
is
plaster.
so huge. Yeah, there are probably taverns all over the place.
So you're under some building and you've got a Roman basement.
Yeah, what would be interesting is to, if we could go in, walk through that little hallway there and see if that's in fact just one room back there or if it's connected to other space.
Right, it looks pretty. Wait. Hey. Nothing like trying the door. I think we're getting in. Here, follow me.
You know, a flashlight is the archaeologist's best friend. Ah, great, here we
I just
are.
happen to have one. It's not open to the public.
No, and the rooms just keep going and going.
Just keeps going, yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's ancient plaster right there. This wall with white, this looks like an ancient A because in ancient graffiti, instead of having a horizontal bar, it's usually diagonal like this.
A treasure trove of ancient graffiti, but no sketch of a crucifixion. Simca and Rebecca persevere. After hours of hunting, they find the exact spot where the crucifixion graffiti was originally discovered. But whatever is not etched in stone is disappearing fast.
This is why it's hard to find graffiti, is because plaster is so friable. It easily comes off of walls. And we're incredibly lucky when someone takes a photo and publishes it, because that is probably all we're going to have 50 years later.
Luck. Luckily, the photograph survives. Evidence that prior to the eruption of Vesuvius, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Romans, people like A, paid with their lives for their Christian faith. And yet, pagan Rome was not succeeding in wiping out the new religion. In fact, there's archaeological evidence that worshippers of the God of Israel were warning their Roman masters that they were marked for utter destruction.
When it comes to ancient artifacts, people like big things. Villas, pillars, temples. They ignore little things, like graffiti. But as we've seen, graffiti can tell you a lot. In Pompeii, graffiti tells us that there were Jews and Christians right here before the eruption. Not only that, graffiti shows us that some of these Christians were converting their Roman masters to their newfound religion. In fact, these new converts were paying a heavy price for what they now believed. We saw the earliest image of a crucifixion found anywhere.
And we have archaeological evidence that the Jews and Christians of Pompeii were warning their Roman masters, were warning their pagan neighbors that they would soon suffer the wrath of the God of Israel.
In 1921, a photograph was published of graffiti scratched on wall plaster. Attached to the published photograph were directions to a specific Pompeii address, House 14.
Should be here. You see how the plaster is gone.
But luckily, we have a really good photo. We have two words, one in Greek, one seemingly in Latin, and then two stars. What do you make of this?
Well, start with the middle word. So that's an attempt in Latin letters to represent the word kerem, which is one of the most chilling words in the Hebrew language. That's the word used in the Bible when God utterly blots out a place. Sodom and Gomorrah were made kerem. And then you've got the poinium, which is not a Latin word, but it's a Latinized word. I think it has to be from the Greek poine, which means to smite. So smite, utterly destroy, and then the two stars. They're five-pointed, they're the Solomon stars. We see them on magic bowls. What it shows us is that people in this culture, particularly Jews and Christians, were warning their friends and neighbors and saying, just wait. You think you're in the lap of luxury, you think everything's fine, everything's peaceful, just wait, because God has something to say.
In an effort to identify the context in which the harem graffiti was found, Simca and Professor Tabor go to an on-site storage facility.
This is the office. Come.
They want to identify the house where the graffiti was found. Suddenly, to their surprise, a worker brings out the original harem inscription.
Grazie.
The plaster was taken off a wall some 50 years ago, and until now, everyone's only had the photograph. Finally, here is the original.
They said it doesn't exist anymore.
Never thought I would see it.
So here's harem. It couldn't be any clearer. And there's ponium. It's so clear. And there are the two Solomonic stars. What's the significance of finding it in Pompeii?
I knew it was in a house, but whose house? And what else do we know about this person? And that's the most important thing with archaeology, is to interpret the graffiti, but also where was it found?
Context.
Yeah, the context. So that it tells more of a story than just the words.
Just then, Francesco, one of the workers who was around during the discovery of this graffiti, comes out.
If you can explain where this was found.
Se ci può spiegare dove è stato trovato?
È stato trovato nella casa del Parco Prono, che si trova lungo la via dell'Abbondanza.
This is not what had been published. House 14 is wrong. The house of Paco Procolo was found with a painting of the owner and his wife on the wall. Simca can see that Francesco sent him to the right place. It's clear where the plaster came from, right in the doorway. It seems that the Stars of Solomon are a kind of amulet designed to protect the family from the harem or destruction that they felt was coming.
People put all their pagan stuff right in the doorways to kind of protect the house. It makes sense that a Christian, a Jew who rejected paganism would put his inscriptions also in the vestibule. Do we know anything about this man?
Lui si sa che era il proprietario di alcuni panifici per Pompei. Durante un viaggio a Gerusalemme si era convertito praticamente alla religione cristiana.
Well, how do we know that he converted to Christianity or...
E ha fatto dei segni allusivi, abbiamo testimonianze,
Mi ha fatto vedere
dei segni allusivi che stavano sui forni.
The phallus?
The phallus.
The big phallus.
He covered.
Yes.
It's a sign of piety.
Whoever owned this bakery, this used to be a bakery, used to have these penises, phalluses, for a good luck charm. But then, here's the key. See the two tones over there? The two tones tell you something. It tells you that it was plastered over. It means that whoever held by that lucky charm suddenly didn't want it there. He converted to Christianity.
Francesco shows Simca one final, astonishing piece of evidence. The same bakery owner who wrote biblical words on his doorway and had phalluses covered over put a cross in one of his bakeries.
La croce del panificio.
They found also cross in a bakery.
Wait. It looks like exactly like the one in Herculaneum. The significance of this cross here, it's graffiti. And it's graffiti that looks almost exactly in terms of the plaster, like the cross that was found in Herculaneum. Where was it found? It was found over the oven. This settles the issue of Herculaneum because they weren't keeping books up there on the shelf. It must have been a religious symbol.
The cluster of clues pointing to an early Christian movement in Pompeii is incredible. A cross found in a bakery, a baker who covers phallic symbols, and the same baker who in his own home has a graffiti of the Hebrew word marked for utter destruction. It seems that he was trying to protect his family from what he believed was imminent destruction. That destruction was not long in coming. In 79 AD, just 9 years after the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, ash began to rain down on Pompeii.
Right where we're standing now, we would have been inside the volcano, inside the nozzle of a giant rocket engine that's firing its thrust straight up into space, basically 10,000 tons of rock that are going up into the atmosphere per second. It flows like a giant red-hot tsunami over the land. And the cloud itself is hot enough to radiate enough heat to ignite the trees that are pinwheeling toward people. If you saw this thing coming, you would try to get away, but you just did not have a chance.
To experience the devastation from the perspective of a Pompeian family, Charles Pellegrino takes Simca from the mouth of the volcano to a middle-class home on the edge of the city.
So, Charlie, what's the significance of this place?
Some of the Roman letters and writings that have survived, specifically Pliny the Younger, who was 17 years old at the time, he gives us the time of the start of the eruption, around lunchtime. And what we're seeing here is the relatively gentle eruption. You have people who are able to climb up on top of the pumice, hoping that whatever is going on, it is going to slow down, it's going to stop.
It's almost like people at a flood. You keep trying to go higher, right, and then you hope it stops, and then you're going to drain.
Right, and right on top of this very sequence higher up, we find the people themselves.
Okay, now let's follow the footsteps of the family.
Okay.
Take us right up.
Perhaps the people are able to make some kind of rudimentary shelter, which is suggested by the wood that we see here. Herculaneum dies between 12 and 1 a.m. The first surge cloud goes right through Herculaneum, hotter than steel emerging white hot from a furnace. And within about a 3-second period, every person, every animal, every plant, the termites and even the bacteria are instantly carbonized. Over here in Pompeii, life still goes on for a while. But at about 7:30 a.m., the fourth surge cloud.
This is right here.
Right here, literally megatons of it, and it surges across the ground like a tsunami made out of ash. And here the people would have died in a time frame within 2 seconds, possibly less than 1 second. These are the people who were able to climb up on top of it. Here you can even see one figure that's putting an arm over another figure. There are skeletons inside every one of these casts.
Now this is very, very sad because it looks like somebody's sheltering maybe a child and a parent.
Well, what we have here, we won't know until we x-ray this one.
Oh my God.
But it could be bloating, or it could be a man trying to shelter from the ash, getting into the mouth of someone who is pregnant.
The minute you said that, I suddenly realized we're looking at a pregnant woman and her husband is trying to shelter her.
Yeah, and it speaks for us all, you know, that in a moment like this, you have this moment of mutual human tenderness that might be a different civilization, but these people are us.
A few weeks after the eruption that may have killed as many as 20,000 people, an overwhelming number by ancient standards, Pompeii was a cold corpse of a city. People had died where they were. Thousands of bodies lay in their homes and out in the streets. The whole city was buried in small pumice stones and ash, up to the top floors. But there is evidence that after the eruption, Romans from other towns tunneled down to floor level, crawling on their hands and knees, coming face to face with the destruction. The tunnelers recorded their interpretation of the events as the wrath of God.
Post Fata Novissima, after the most recent Fata. The sun strengthens these pleasing to God people against the cold people.
Almost like a biblical reference, that this is punishment, divine wrath. There are those people, and this is a very biblical terminology, who are pleasing to God, and there are those people, the pagans, who are not pleasing to God, and they're dead, they're frozen. You can literally see the wrath of God.
Strikingly, the eruption of Vesuvius parallels a much earlier story that Jews and Christians knew all too well: Sodom and Gomorrah, sister cities whose inhabitants were notorious for their sexual deviations. The book of Genesis records that as punishment for their sins, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by fire and brimstone. Incredibly, there's a graffiti that directly links Pompeii to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Today been made into a kind of modern guardhouse. But in the first century, this was somebody's home. And maybe the day of the eruption, or even the day before the volcanic eruption, somebody hastily scrawled on the wall in charcoal the chilling words, Sodom and Gomorrah.
No way.
Somebody literally is writing this while the ash is falling down.
Possibly. Yeah. It's not there anymore. It was on one of these walls. It's now modern plaster. And it's been taken off to some museum.
What do you make of this charcoal inscription showing up here?
This has to be a Jew or a Christian who's thinking, why is the volcano erupting? Because this is Sodom and Gomorrah, and God is punishing this place. It's amazing.
Aren't we imposing our view how they would have interpreted it? What do we have that says, you know what? Now we know that Christians and Romans interpreted the eruption of Vesuvius as the divine wrath of God.
In the last book of the New Testament, the book of Revelation, if you read that, it has to be a description of the destruction of Pompeii. Now,
wait a minute. You tell me that
Pompeii is mentioned in the New Testament, not by name. What the text says is Babylon is going to fall. Babylon means Rome. So it's everything from the city of Rome, the culture of Rome. But the date of that text is from the time of the Emperor Titus, and it's around the year 79. This text is written, and it talks about the city will be destroyed in 1 hour. The smoke of its burning will be seen in the harbor, and mentions fornication and immorality. Allegorically, this is Sodom and Gomorrah.
what you're suggesting is that hiding in plain sight in the New Testament itself, the interpretation was that this is divine retribution.
They saw the burning of Pompeii as the beginning of the end. As Rome is headed down, how do we know? Because God burned it in a single day, like Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's what happened, right where we're standing.
I can just imagine a slave from the Holy Land cringing in a corner. There's nowhere to run, and ash is raining down. He or she, someone like Martha, would have seen the glory of the temple in Jerusalem and its destruction. Then in Pompeii, as a slave, they would have witnessed and maybe even experienced violence and orgies. Now, as Vesuvian ash was coming down, I can imagine Martha dipping into it and writing the epitaph of Pompeii, Sodom and Gomorrah. Less than 2 years after the eruption, the Emperor Titus died. A few Romans converted to Judaism, but a more sizable group converted to the new, more accessible Jewish sect already being called Christianity. It was this group that laid the foundation for the whole empire to become Christian less than 250 years after the eruption, and for Christianity to become, to this day, the most populous religion in the world. And all this was accomplished with a little help from a volcano.
Enjoy Light and Easy's Flavors of the World, and you could win one of 10 $10,000 travel vouchers.